He wasn't supposed to be there that night. He knew it, but it didn't stop him from going. Seth never was very good with rules. When he had been younger, he found them restricting, and he believed that by disregarding these restrictions, he was living life to the fullest, enjoying himself. Anyway, it had been 10 years since that night. Much had happened since then. Some things were now different, while others were exactly the same. 10 years ago, he was a teenager. What's worse than that is he was a teenager with a driver's license. He had a job at a fast food restaurant in town. In the summertime, he often worked until the restaurant closed. This was late at night, so he'd spend many a summer nights driving home. His parents knew him. They trusted him enough, but they also knew he could get himself into trouble if he didn't have some boundaries to keep him in line. He was to drive straight home after work. There were to be no pit stops along the way. But on that particular night, he planned to break the rule. Why? Well, while at work, he had been listening to his coworker talk about the legend of the Brown Mountain lights that people had seen in the Linville Gorge. It's all just stories, probably, Seth told him. Oh no, John replied. It's not. The lights are there. It's well documented. People have been seeing them for years. So what causes them, he asked. Well, people have theories, but nobody really knows for sure. At the beginning of the conversation, it was just a bunch of chit-chat to pass the time as they worked. But the more they talked about it, the more intrigued Seth became. Are they there every night, he asked. Not on every night. You just never know, but some people say that you are more likely to see them after it rains. Interesting, he said, and then he heard it. Thunder rumbled outside. It began to rain. When his shift was over, there was no question in his mind as to what he was going to do. The rain had subsided, but his curiosity about those lights had not. He was going. He figured he could stop by for just a few minutes on his way home. If he didn't stay for too long, his parents would never know. When he got to the overlook he was told about, he found a place to park quite easily. He stood and looked out over the gorge. It was pretty dark, so he figured if any lights did appear, he would have no problem spotting them. After a couple minutes, he was amazed to see something. There were indeed some lights rising some distance away from where he was out of the gorge. The problem is he couldn't see or say for sure if what he was seeing was the Brown Mountain lights or if they were something else. After a minute, they disappeared. Having a cool story now to relay back to John the next day, he began walking back to his car. On the way back, he suddenly stopped when he heard a sound. He nearly fell to the ground when he looked back and saw what was there. Now, with the sound that he had heard, he was almost certain he would see a person or an animal there, but there wasn't. It was one of the lights, and it was much, much closer. He had the feeling of being watched, as if this wasn't just a light, but perhaps there was some kind of intelligence behind it. Hello? He called out to it with a surprising fearlessness. There was no audible response, but the light flickered noticeably when he had spoken. He tried again. Hello, hello, hello. And the light flickered 3 times. This was strange. He wasn't sure what to try next. Slowly, he began to approach it. Slowly, it retreated. He stopped. The light stopped. Needless to say, he ended up staying longer than planned. He gained no answers as to what was going on, but there was without a doubt something going on. When he finally did leave, he discovered that the light followed him. But it kept its distance, Driving home, he could see that the light was in his rearview mirror. Earlier, he had not been afraid, but truth be told, he was starting to fear. The light did not follow him into the house. However, as he lay in bed, trying to sleep, he found it difficult because of the brightness in his room coming from his window. Looking out of it, there it was. The light appeared outside his window the next night too, and the next, and the next, and the next. Every night for the next 10 years, it was there. Over this time, he only went outside if at nighttime if it was necessary, because when it was dark, the light followed him. But it never got too close. He never told anyone what was happening, figuring they'd think him crazy. He kept this secret to himself. But throughout that time, he started to research the lights. He found that some people once thought they were train lights. And for a time, many accepted this explanation until the tracks were inaccessible for a few weeks in the early 20th century because of a flood. But the lights were still being seen. Some believe the lights began as a result of electricity coming to the area, but this didn't explain why Native Americans had been reporting them in the area long before electricity was there. Speaking of Native Americans, they had stories of what they believed they were. Many years ago, there was a battle between the Cherokee and the Catawba tribes. They have said that the mysterious lights are the spirits of women in search of the warriors who had perished. Of course, science-minded people brush such stories aside and have come up with several theories, but from all of his searching over this decade, he hadn't found any theories that could be proven as the cause. Whatever the truth was, Seth didn't know, but he believed in them. He had seen them, and for the last 10 years, he had one stalking him. One day, he was out at a store, and he heard someone call to him. "Seth!" sounded off a somewhat familiar voice. He turned to face it and found himself looking at his old friend John. He hadn't seen him in a long time. After graduation, John had gone off to college. "Hey, John," he replied with a smile on his face. "It's good to see you." And it really was, too. They caught up for a bit and decided to go get some lunch together. They actually went to the restaurant where they had worked together as teenagers. "Wow, this place brings back memories," Seth said as they found a table with their trays of food. "Sure does," John said. "Hey, funny I should run into you. I was just thinking about you the other day." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah, I had a weird thought. You probably don't remember this, being so long ago, but there was a night I was telling you about the Brown Mountain Lights, and you had a bunch of questions." Seth laughed and replied, "Believe it or not, I remember. I actually think about that more than you would be able to guess." "Huh," said John. "Well, that's weird. But anyway, what made me think about that was what, 10 years ago?" "Yeah, about that," said Seth. "So what?" "So what? Don't you find it strange that the lights haven't been seen since around that time?" "Wait, what?" "Yeah, there's been no report of sightings of the lights in the last 10 years. Now, whatever had been talked about for the rest of that lunch, Seth did not know. What John told him completely blew his mind. He went home that day with one question. Was this true? And if it was true, how had he missed it? He literally had spent most of his free time over the last number of years researching these lights. But when he did a specific search on the computer, he found that John was right. Nobody had seen them for 10 years. For the longest time, the big mystery had been, what were causing these lights? Now, the question had become, where did they go? Now, Seth knew that It had been 10 years since he had been there, and he had apparently taken this light home with him. And since then, nobody had seen it. Was he the cause? That night he couldn't sleep, and it wasn't because of the light coming through his bedroom window. Over the years, he had grown used to that. For whatever reason, he decided to take a drive. Before too long, he found himself back at the place where it had all started. He was overlooking the gorge. His light friend was at its usual distance from him. He'd become comfortable with this, maybe too comfortable. He knew that whenever he spoke to the light, he never got a response, but he turned to it and said, "What are you? Why do you follow me? What do you want?" This was almost like thinking aloud. No response expected. But then something happened that had never happened before. The light got closer. It was slow at first, and he considered running. Just before he could, though, the light came at him at a great speed. The next thing he knew, he was surrounded by its brightness. Beginning that night, people started having sightings again of the brown mountain lights. Actually, sightings were even more numerous than they had ever been. People saw the lights just about every night, but nobody ever saw Seth again. Thank you for listening. This is Custom Storyteller. If you liked the video, if you wouldn't mind clicking like, that would be appreciated. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I would encourage you to do so and to click on the notifications button so that you can be notified of any future videos that we do. Also, you can email the email address that's on the screen. If you have a suggestion for a future video, you could email in and say, "I'd like to hear a story about this or about that," and we will write a custom story and post it in one of our future videos. Thank you again for listening, and goodbye.